Okay, time for yin yoga. Uh, we'll start today seated. You could put a cushion underneath the hips if you want to, something low, like if you're comfortable seated on the mat, you can, but if you have a blanket, you could do that. Just to add a little extra comfort. If you're fine, leave it like that. So let's come to a cross-legged seat. And whichever shin in front is fine. So from here, you're going to focus on the foot that's in front of you. So the one that's right in front of you, and you'll take the foot. I like bringing it up onto the knee or the shin just to get it a little bit closer. But if that's difficult, you can keep it down on the ground in front of you. You'll take your opposite hand and take the index finger between the big toe and the second finger between the second and third toe, and so on. So you're weaving your fingers between the toes. You'll probably have to look down and make sure that's happening. And sometimes there isn't a lot of space between the toes. You may not be able to get a finger between a couple of the toes. So just do the best you can. And then you're trying to wiggle the fingers all the way down so they're at the base of the toes. So play with that. It's a puzzle. So you want the webbing of the base of the fingers and the base of the toes as close together as possible. Here's where it is helpful to bring the foot up. You want to keep it flexed because we have the knee bent, and then grab onto the top of the foot. So the palm of the hands on the sole of the foot, the fingers are on the top of the foot, and then move the top of the foot forward and back so that elbows flaring out. That helps you move the top of the foot. Just kind of warming it up, getting some movement, exploring that range of motion there. You're also getting into the toes. But when you just open up the foot this way, sometimes you kind of forget about what's happening with the toes, but it is like a toe spreader with the fingers between each toe. Okay, so keep hanging onto the toes, but stop the movement. Spread the fingers as wide as you can, which means you're spreading the toes as wide as you can. You might even be able to get the fingers down a little bit lower if you're not already all the way down. So you're spreading the fingers as wide as you can, getting the toes to go as wide as they can. Then grab onto the top of the foot. We're doing this one again. Flare the elbow. You're moving the foot forward and back. So toe yoga. I have one person that I teach in person who does this every night. We did it once in class and she does it every night while she's watching TV. She absolutely loves it. Okay. Bring the fingers all the way down to the base of the toes. Spread the fingers one more time. Same thing we did before. Go as wide as you can. And start to release. Take the fingers out from between the toes. Extend the legs out in front of you. Look at the difference between the feet. You'll have more space between the toes. The color of your feet will be a little bit different. All that from just a couple of minutes of giving yourself some attention. Okay, cross the legs again, other shin in front this time. So we're switching feet. If you have rings or jewelry on, it can be a little bit painful. So if that's the case, take the rings off. It's not worth it. You'll grab on to the foot, wiggle the index finger between the big toe, the second toe, and then keep weaving the fingers between each toe. So just the fingers, not the thumb. Thumb is free. See how far down you can get the fingers to the base of the toe. Flex the foot and then start to move the foot forward and back, flaring out that elbow. So it's opposite hand, opposite foot, so that the palm of the hand's on the sole of the foot and the fingers are on the top of the foot. This is what's helpful about teaching in person along with doing these videos is when I'm in person, I have more people in front of me and I can see what most people do with the cues I give. Sometimes they're not great. Okay, so stop the movement, spread the fingers as wide as you can, make some space between the toes. And this gets better over time. So if this is your first time doing it, it's a little tricky because you're just not used to it. Okay, gently release, grab onto the top of the foot, flare the elbow. But as your anatomy gets used to this, it gets easier. You do start making space. So something to think about if you're having anything going on in the feet, this is a great way to give them some love. And see if you can wiggle the fingers down a little bit further, then spread the hands as wide as you can, spreading the toes as wide as you can. And release the hand, wiggle the fingers out from between the toes, extend the legs, see the difference between the feet, the work that you did. And we'll come to hands and knees. So as you come to hands and knees, you don't need any props. Maybe you could use a block, have a block nearby if you have one. You might not need it at all. Bring the knees and the feet all the way together. Tuck the toes underneath you. So you're coming into a yogi toe squat. You could just keep the hands down and push the hips back toward the heels. If you're feeling a good enough stretch here with the feet, then stay here. If you want to go deeper, you could start to walk the hands in toward the body. This is where you could use the block. You could bring the hands up on the block. Some of you can come all the way up, bring the hands on top of the thighs and the hips are right over the heels, and you're sitting up straight. So head's right in line with the hips and the feet. This is the maximum weight you can put on the feet. Make sure the fourth and fifth toe are going straight forward. Some of us have to manually make that happen. So if you're here, great, the hands are free. If your hands are down the mat, stay there. Don't worry about this next part. So take the hand, the left hand, bend it back. So you're pointing back behind you. Grab onto those 4 fingers with the right hand. And you're just making some space in the front side of the wrists and the hand. And it's up to you how much pressure you apply. So you want it to feel good. You're not looking for any pain. Just should feel like a nice therapeutic opening that's happening. Then grab onto the thumbs, let go of those fingers. Maybe you grab on the thumb with 2, 3 fingers. You decide how much pressure you want to put. And switch sides. So point the fingertips back behind you, grab onto those right 4 fingers with the left hand, and you start to bring the fingers back, almost like you're trying to get them back toward the forearm, until you feel a nice opening in the hand, the wrist. It's nice to get things going the other way. Deeply breathing in and out through the nose, up and down the back of the throat also helps. Then gently release, grab onto that thumb. Give it an opening. And let that go. Bring the hands down in front of you. Untuck the toes. You can tap the tops of the feet on the mat just to get them going the other way. Okay, knees and feet all the way together, but you're keeping the tops of the feet on the mat. Sit back onto the heels. And same thing here. If your knees don't like this, then just keep the hands down in front of you and you don't have to bring the knees all the way back. If your knees are okay with it, then sit back on top of the heels. Chest is lifted. Reach the arms forward, palms facing up. Bring the right arm on top of the left arm. Eagle arms, which could just mean you grab the tops of the shoulders if you have tight shoulders. Elbows come down toward the torso, or bring the backs of the hands together. Maybe the left fingertips slide inside of the right hand. And then you could, if the forearms are together, lift the forearms up, keep the hands away from the face, and you feel a nice opening across the upper back. You will no matter where the arms are in your eagle shape. So it's a matter of listening to your body. And reach the arms forward, switch sides, left arm on top of right, either grab onto the shoulders or backs of the forearms together. You don't have to bring the right fingers inside the left heel of the hand. That's just an option. It does make things a little bit deeper. So see if you're open enough for that. Maybe the forearms start to lift. We're all trying to keep the shoulders away from the ears, and you're trying to find some width across the shoulder blades at the same time. And release the arms down by the sides. Bring the hands to the mat. Tops of the feet are still down on the mat. You could stay like this. If you want to get into the ankles and the top of the foot, you could start to bring the knees in toward the chest. Tops of the feet are still down, but ankles lift. And maybe you're down pretty low. Maybe the knees come up high. If it's new, it takes a while to get the knees up higher. It's an ankle stretch. Set the knees back down if you've done that. So now you're back in tabletop. Separate the knees hip width distance. Tops of the feet could be down, or you could tuck the toes, which might feel nice at this point again. And we're coming into cat cow. So just warming up the spine. Inhale, reach the heart forward, lift the tail. And on the exhale, round the whole spine, chin in toward the chest. Keep going on your own. Do some rounds that feel good for you. Just follow the length of your own breath, which is longer than usual. So that means the movement is slow. One more cycle, forward and back. Back to a neutral spine. So you may want props for this next one. You can definitely skip it if you don't have any, but grab a bolster if you have one or something like it. And you'll bring it the wide way toward the center of the mat. So what's underneath you, hands can come out in front of the bolster. So if you don't have blocks, skip them, skip this part. If you do have blocks, take the blocks on the tallest height. You want them wide still on the mat. And this way it just lifts up the chest. All we're doing is stepping the right foot forward ahead of the bolster and trying to line up this right knee right over the right ankle. Chest stays lifted. The bolster's up against the left thigh. Doesn't seem like it's doing anything, but it's giving you a little bit of support. So now you lift the chest, you can sink the hips. Chest is high, hips are low, and you're not going as deep as you possibly can because this is going to be a longer hold. So try not to go too deep into it right out of the gate. Give yourself some space to explore as your hips become more open. This is also our first big hip opening and lower body opening. And it's up to you what you do with the back toes. They can be tucked, untucked. But since you open up the feet, maybe we pay a little bit more attention to them today. They can be relaxed, but see which one feels better. And eyes and yin are really in any physical part of yoga are important. So looking down and keeping the eyelids half open is a good idea, especially when you have the chest open. If you can close the eyes and you don't feel like you're going to get sleepy or wobbly, then you can do that. I get too relaxed when I close my eyes for a longer hold. So I feel like I get sleepy and wobbly when that happens. So I just look down. It's still relaxing. And then you try not to move the eyes around. So eyes are connected to the brain. If you're moving the eyes around, the thoughts start swirling. If you can keep them fixed on one spot and focus on your breath, it's a little bit easier to stay present. And all these physical poses are such a small part of yoga. We need to move to find stillness, or at least comfort in stillness. The more we practice, the better we get at finding stillness in the mind. And it's the stillness of the mind that brings clarity, helps us feel more like ourselves. It's just a reset, really, more than anything else. Taking a moment to unplug. Start to shift the hips back until you can bring that right knee back underneath you. So you're back in tabletop. Maybe the hands are on blocks. Maybe the hands are down on the mat. You're stepping the left foot forward. And this is a nice counter, just switching sides. You'll feel a big difference. Try to stack the left knee right over the left ankle. Can be behind it, just not ahead of it. Chest is lifted, right thighs all the way up against the bolster. And that right knee, you can bring it back behind the hip if there's enough opening in the hip. Sometimes the knees or the thighs vertical, and that's fine. But if you can get the hips ahead of the right knee, that's a little bit deeper. Chest is lifted. We're right back in on the other side. Where do you want that right foot? Do you want to keep the top of the foot resting on the mat? Do you want the toes tucked? Which one's feeling better? The feet can be sensitive, so maybe one way is an obvious choice. As you're breathing in and out through the nose, you should be able to hear the sound of your own breath. You're trying to make like a ha sound if you're fogging up a mirror. Or an ocean wave like sound. Last couple breaths here, make them long. Start to shift the hips back, bring that left knee back underneath you, and you'll set the blocks off to the side if you're using them. Just bring them off to the side of the mat. Your bolster is probably right where you need it to be. So hands in front of the bolster. Start to walk the hands forward. You're bringing the hips on top of the bolster. Make sure your navel is ahead of the bolster. So belly button is free. You're lying down flat on your stomach. Flat prone, so head down. Two options with the upper body. You can stack the hands one on top of the other, rest the forehead down, and that should keep your nose up and away from the mat. Some people like to bring the arms down by the sides and turn the head to one side. So you could do it that way too. See which one feels better in your body. So the hips are elevated with the bolster underneath you. And with that elevation of the hips, you're in a back bend. Legs can totally relax. Tops of the feet can rest down on the mat. And you're even getting a stretch there on the top of the foot, ankle area. Knees are probably resting down on the mat. And start to let things become heavy. Those of you that chose to turn the head to one side, lift the head, turn it the other way to stay even on the neck. If the neck's only going one way today, that's fine. Stay the way you are. We'll start to lift the head back up. You'll come back to hands and knees. So walk the hands in, lift yourself up to hands and knees. We'll keep using the bolster. So you're back on hands and knees. Bring the bolster all the way up against the knees. Knees are still hip width distance apart. Bring the forearms and elbows down to the mat. So what's nice about having the bolster all the way up against the knees is it won't let you go forward with the hips. You want to keep the thighs vertical. So walk the elbows forward. You'll start to feel an upper body opening. Bring the forehead down to the mat, coming into melting heart pose. Hug the belly in, keep the spine long. The heart's going down, is going forward toward the top of the mat, and the hips stay lifted. If for whatever reason this shape doesn't work well in your body, you can come to Sphinx pose. You could even still use the bolster. So stepping the feet back, elbows down, forearms down, chest is lifted, and you're still in a back bend either way. So you got to find one that works for you. Melting heart pose is working. Stay there. Try not to go too deep into it because you will be here for a little while. If you're in melting heart pose and you want a little bit more, you could bring the hands together like prayer and back behind the head. If that's going well, elbows can crawl forward a little bit so the sides of the torso get longer. Keep hugging the belly in so you keep that length in the lower back. If you don't hug the belly in, the lower back will start to arch and it'll start to sink toward the mat. And that's too much weight for the lower back. This can be a nice shoulder opening while you're in the back bend. If you need a break at any point, just bring the hands back down in front of you the way we were. If you have the hands back behind the head, bring them down to the mat, lift the head back up. We're coming back to hands and knees. So if you're in Sphinx pose, come back to hands and knees. And let's set the bolster off to the right side of the mat the long way. So it's not on the mat, it's just next to it. You'll come to seated, feet come out to the side and then out in front of you. Get the hips in the center of the mat. Come on down onto your back. So once you lie down onto your back, this bolster is the long way next to the hips. You want the top of the bolster to be near the top of the hip, so it's down a little bit lower. Keep the feet on the mat. Just bring the knees over to the right so the knees are resting on the bolster, coming into a gentle twist. Left arm reaches outside of the shoulder, and you can gaze over the left arm. And this might be really nice to just stay here. I'll give you another option in case you're looking for a little bit more. You could bring the feet up on top of the bolster. So that way the knees, the calf, the feet are completely supported by the bolster. It's a deeper twist. If you want to do that, you can. If you liked keeping the feet down and just the knees on the bolster, then stay there. Eyes can be closed. Right hand can rest on the body somewhere. Last big inhale in through the nose. Back out through the nose. Start to find your way back to center. Roll the head back. Take the bolster, move it over to the left side, same spot, just alongside the body. Have it down a little bit lower, but let's counter pose. Bring the knees in toward the chest, hang on to the knees. Let's keep the knees and the feet together. Just move the knees around in a circle. Feeling the hips underneath you move around on the mat. and switch side or switch the direction of the circles, going the other way. And they might feel the same. It might feel a little different when you go the other way. Feet come back down to the mat. Keep the feet on the mat. Just bring the knees over onto the bolster. You might need to move the bolster of the body a little bit. Right arm reaches outside the shoulder. Maybe the head rolls to the right. You can keep the knees, just the knees on the bolster. You could play with bringing the feet up onto the bolster. See which one feels better. Probably whatever you did on the first side to keep things even. But I know sometimes we have things going on in the body where we just need a different option on one side. And start to bring the head back to center. The feet come back to the mat. Find center on your back. Hug the knees in toward the chest. Keep the knees and the feet together. Go the opposite way with your circle. So the other way. There's one way you like to start. See if you can figure out what the other way is. No big deal. Everything feels the same. Switch the direction. Go the other way with your circles. Then set the feet down onto the mat. Roll over to your right side. Use the hands to bring yourself up to seated. We'll come into a wide-legged straddle. You could prop the hips up, move anything out of the way. You could prop the hips up. A wide-legged straddle is nice to sit your hips up on something at least this height, so a folded blanket. It takes any kind of rounding that typically happens in the lower back away. If you don't have anything, it's not a big deal. Legs go out wide, not as wide as you can possibly go, but fairly wide. And if you do have something underneath you, you almost want to feel like you're going to fall off of it. So like you're tipping forward. Okay, so let's bring the left foot in. Half butterfly. So you want the foot to be in the center of the body. So think about if you were to do full butterfly, where would this foot be? That's exactly where you want it now. So away from the right leg. And then we'll just fold straight forward. You could use blocks too if you have those nearby. Sometimes that's nice to rest the hands on. You can start to slide the blocks forward. You could even use them as arm rests. Let the head and the neck go. You want this to be relaxing, so don't go so far into it that you're struggling to stay in it. But the right foot's flexed because the toes are pointing forward. So you're on the side of the right foot. So coming back into the hips, we did those lunges at the beginning. We'll spend some time here. Finishing up with the legs and the hips. And you'll start to come back up to seated. If you have blocks in front of you, maybe just shift them a little bit farther forward. Bring the hands back behind you, soles of the feet wide on the mat, knees go side to side, windshield wipers. And you'll feel the opening that you did with the windshield wipers because we've only done it on one side. So it might feel really nice when you bring that left inner knee down to the mat because it's the opposite direction of what you were doing in that hip opening. We were just in half butterfly. Okay, so we'll come back to the wide-legged straddle. If you're still seated up on something, take a moment to get the hips going forward. So like you're going to fall off of it. Toes point up. Bring this right foot in, half butterfly. So toes point straight forward. It's away from the left thigh. And then start to walk the hands forward. Find where you're comfortable in this. I forgot to mention, if you have anything going on in this right knee, you could put a block underneath the knee for extra support. And also with the hips propped up, you'll be able to get that knee down a little bit lower. So maybe you're in a different spot on this side. That's typical. Don't feel like you have to be in the same exact place. You're just trying to find a similar opening on this side, similar intensity that you did on the first side, which could look completely different. You'll start to bring yourself back up to seated. If you have blocks in front of you, you can just set those off to the side. You won't need them. Bring the soles of the feet to the mat wide, hands back behind you, windshield wipers, knees go side to side. The next pose, you'll want to have a bolster. If you don't have one, you can definitely do it without. You can set the blanket though, if you're using that off to the side, you won't need it. You'll take the bolster, come back onto your mat if you turn to the side so you're facing forward. Take the bolster the wide way underneath the knees, soles of the feet on the mat, and then come on down onto your back. Once you come to your back, and you might need to shift the bolster a little bit. Once you come down onto your back, bring the soles of the feet together and the knees wide. So feet are on the mat in front of the bolster and the bolster supporting the knees going wide. So you can stay like this, arms down by the sides. I'll give you one other option, which would intensify the pose. So it's the same thing. The only difference is you bring the feet up on top of the bolster, and the bolster might need to move away from you, might need to come closer. You'll know when you get it there. The bolster was just a little bit further. So make an effort to get it right where you want it. This is deeper than the feet on the mat. So maybe you try this. If it's great, stay there. If it starts to become too intense, you just bring the feet forward onto the mat whenever you need to. So close the eyes, arms down by the sides, palms can face up. Or you could bring the hands on top of the body. So maybe left hand on the heart, right hand on the belly, or two hands in one place. is sometimes really nice too. So we put this shape is familiar. We just did half of it seated. Now you're doing a reclined version of it and opening up both hips at the same time. So symmetrical version. As you start to find a sense of relaxation, calm, lying on your back, we'll stay here. It's a really easy transition. If the feet are up on the bolster, start to slide the feet forward so they're on the mat again. Still keeping the same shape with the legs. You can just feel the difference if you brought the feet down. Still a nice opening. And then we'll all extend the legs forward, just lengthening them out in front of you. Knees still elevated with the bolster underneath you. You can keep the hands wherever they are. This is Shavasana. Close the eyes, drop right in. You have arrived. Start to wiggle the fingers and the toes. Stretch the arms overhead, reach out through the legs, getting long on your mat. Walk the feet in, soles of the feet to the mat. Rolling over to your right side, you can just move the bolster out of the way with the feet if you'd like. Then using the left hand, bring yourself up to seated. You can either sit on the bolster, the mat, however you're comfortable to close your practice. Sitting up tall, chest is lifted. Bring the hands together in front of you. Maintain the lift of the chest as you start to bow the head, taking a moment to yourself to honor and acknowledge your heart and spirit, as well as everyone around you. Bring the head back up, blink open the eyes. Namaste. Hope you feel great. And I hope there's some gratitude for making time for your practice today too. It's so important. Really nice to see all of you.